I keep seeing photographers making this one huge mistake, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to correct it and how to get better detail in your photos. Now, to make this a little bit more interesting, I'm going to be trying to do this in under 5 minutes because your time is valuable and it's really cold out here. So put that timer on the screen, let's go. So this technique has to do with your exposure. We all want our exposure to be just right, but in those high dynamic range situations where you have a lot of bright highlights and dark shadows, it's tough to get your exposure exactly where you want it. This technique is going to help you bring out a lot more detail in your shadows and maintain those, while also dialing in your highlights adequately as well. This is a technique that I've used in really difficult situations like desert sunrises or mountain sunsets, so it's sure to help you in any situation that you may find yourself in. So this composition here is what I'm going to be dealing with today, and it's one that has a lot of those dark shadows, but also some really bright highlights on the roots and the leaves itself. Now for me, a really good sweet spot for a scene like this is a 35mm lens. So I'm using a Sigma 35 f1.2 prime lens to get this shot. Here's what this photo looks like. As you can see, we have a lot of root detail down here, but it's a hard, difficult situation because normally I would photograph it at an exposure like this, but that makes it too dark. It's f16, 1/30th of a second, ISO 400. But if you look at the histogram, everything is pushed to the left. Now, if I were to take this photo trusting, let's say, my highlights, I would push it right to where my highlights start flashing, like these zebra stripes right here, and I would dial that in right to where they're just at the point of flashing, and I would take a photo. That's 1/13th of a second, but if you look at the histogram, everything is pretty much to the center. I might even try to reduce those highlights by taking it like 1/20th of a second. Here's the problem with that. If you're shooting at 1/20th of a second and those shadows are super dark, when you raise those up in post-processing to get them exactly where you want them, it's gonna be like putting a grainy film filter on your photos. But if I increase that exposure to something like 1/10th of a second and push that histogram more to the right, that's called exposing to the right, or ETTR. If I take this photo, you can see that it is much brighter, but I'm still maintaining all of my highlights in this because I'm not touching the far right side of the histogram. That's actually how your camera can lie to you sometimes. Bad camera. So that's the in-camera fix for exposing to the right, but there's still something you need to know for the post-processing side. Let's switch this over into my office so we can look at exactly how to fix this in post and get you the perfect shots. I still have some decent time on the clock, so let's see. If I zoom in on this photo, that is the darkened exposures, you can see in the histogram up here in the top right. If I hit the J key, you can see these blue highlights start to come in on a lot of these. That means I would have to lift my exposure, but what that does is create a lot of graininess in the photo and then overblows my highlights when I have those pushed up. Now, one way you could get around that is increasing your shadows, but then look how grainy that is when you pull it up that high. Even in the leaf and some of the details over here in the tree trunk, you're actually getting a lot of graininess in the photo, and it can't be corrected when you use clarity, and contrast just makes it that much worse. So let's move over to the photo that I used ETTR on. Looking at this photo, you can see it's way further over to the right with the histogram, but the reason that you use ETTR, or exposed to the right, is because now you can pull that histogram back and it won't damage the shadows in your photo because of what's going on. So if I hit my J key on my keyboard, you can see that none of the highlights are actually overblown and touching the right side of that histogram, and I have no shadows coming in there as well. So if I just drop the exposure here, I can maintain those shadows while also maintaining the highlights as well, and it's not creating that graininess that the darkened exposure was. So that's why a lot of people use exposed to the right and they don't do that. Even with something like clarity or adding more contrast to the photo, you're not damaging that photo any. And if you want to drop your highlights even more, just pull your highlight slider down and your white slider down too, to make it an even histogram and having the most detail across the entire photo as possible. Check that timer. Got it, nailed it. Now you know how to use ETTR and not make the same mistake that so many other photographers make. If you want more videos, click this playlist showing up on your screen right now that's gonna help you out even more.